here we are. Okay, Alex, lovely to meet you. I'm Steve. I'm on the marketing team with Guitar Center, and this is Perry. He's on our guitar team. Very excited to speak with you today and, just get to know a little bit more about the Epiphone Axcess. Can you start us off with a little bit of what it's like working with Gibson and designing your dream guitar?
In my the little video that I did for the launch, I talk about when I used to go to a music shop in Toronto, and every Saturday, and I would sit and play a 335 or a Les Paul for an hour until I got kicked out, and I'd come back the next week and just do that over and over and over again. And a dream of mine was to own a Gibson more than any other great guitar that was around. I have to say that all those years later, when Gibson approached me to do my own model, I really felt honored by that, and I thought that's really coming to a high point on that journey. So in 2000, I guess it was probably, we released that guitar in 2011, so we started working on it a couple of years before, and I just let them know what I needed in terms of the utility of the guitar. I needed a piezo, I needed the Floyd Rose. They came up with the sculpting of with the neck joints so that you can get your hand up nice and high. All of those things, the tone splitter, the two input jacks. And in my mind, what I really wanted to create was a guitar that any guitarist could use in any situation or in any application. And I think we were really kind of successful with that. We went back and forth on the design, and that's why it took a couple of years. We went through different pickups until we found something that I felt suited that platform. And it was, I think, very, very successful, and certainly in terms of the concept and following it through was. And that was the great thing about the Epiphone 10 years later, having all those same qualities and characteristics in that guitar, but in a package that was a little more affordable, particularly for beginner players. My concern was the quality going to be the same? And it surprised me when I started getting the prototypes from Epiphone how great the guitar was. It felt great. The weight was great. The feel was great. Everything about it was so satisfying for me, and I was really, really quite happy with that.
I was going to ask you about that because we got when they first showed us their, I don't know if you've seen them yet, but they have a 1959 version of an Epiphone, and they just released them last year. And when they first showed us those, they were designed in conjunction with a custom shop. So I was going to ask you, when you got those first guitars, I would imagine you were just blown away by just how great they were.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the custom shop, those guitars, they're expensive guitars. They're not for everybody. And you really got to make a commitment if you're going to spend, $3,500 to $5,000 on an instrument. This priced in at under $1,000, well less than $1,000, is such a great value, I think, and that's what it's all about. I mean, you want to get as many people playing as you can, and you want to get them on good instruments. I started on a $10 Kent acoustic that my parents bought me. That thing was a nightmare, but I didn't know better. And the action was about 4 inches high. Could have been a pedal. It could have been a steel guitar, but that's what I started out with. And then my next guitar, which was the Kenora, which was also a very inexpensive, cheap guitar. It sounded crappy. The action. It was unbalanced. It just never felt great. But to me, it was the best guitar in the world until I finally actually did get a Gibson. To see all of that stuff in this package available to young players, I think is really, really great.
Oh, I think, young players, I think there's going to be a lot of gigging musicians that buy this guitar because it does so many things that most other guitars in this price point don't even touch.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, you mentioned your first great guitar, and there's that infamous story of the first time Rush got their an advancement from the record company, and you guys went into a music store and just went nuts. Can you tell us about that? Because that's like every guy's dream.
I know,
to be
it
able
is.
just to get cash and go in there.
Okay,
just buy up.
So in 1967. When I used to go to this music store, it was along McQuaid's here in Toronto. I played for an hour. I'd sit down, I'd take a 335 or maybe a Les Paul or an SG and play for an hour, and I'd get kicked out, and I'd come back the next week, and I would do this, forever and ever. And it was always the same salesman, but he never knew my name or anything about me. He gave me 1 hour and get out, kid, unless you're going to buy that thing. So here we were, I guess 6 or 7 years later, when we got our record advance, we went to Long and McQuaid's to buy all this gear. Because really, we were playing bars and high schools before that. So I had one little Marshall 50 with a single cabinet. Geddy had a Sun, I think, cabinet with a Sun head. And we went shopping, and it was a dream come true. I mean, I think we were making $75 a week at the time, and to go in the store and be carte blanche. I'll take that Gibson, that Les Paul, and maybe I'll take that one too, and give me 2 of those stacks of Marshalls. Oh, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was such an exciting thing. And no kidding, isn't that the dream of every musician, to go into a music store and just buy whatever you want?
Oh, yeah. And when you said that right there, I'm reminded of the Wayne's World movie where he went in and played that guitar every day. And then the sales guy goes, "Can I put the guitar back now?" And Wayne's like, "Actually, I think I'm feeling sassy today. Do you take cash?" Another question is, when you've had so many years of playing music and writing music and touring, and you've always been very, the way that your rig has always changed over the years, your amplifiers and everything, and how, in Rush, going through all those different stages of music. I mean, it just going from the 70s, which it was more blues based, going into more progressive, heavier music, and then going into the 80s, almost some new wave elements, and back into the guitar focus at the end of the 80s and into the 90s. And how did all of that come together? Because when I went to make this guitar, because when I see this guitar, this new Epiphone, I'm thinking of your signature models you came out with the custom shop, like in 2007 or 8, which was like the Axcess.
Yeah.
And I see so many things, and you've kind of touched on this already, but there's so many elements in there. I mean, how did all those years of all those changes come into that?
I think as a band, Rush was progressive in a lot of ways. We looked at what was happening around us, and that would influence us musically. In terms of technology, things were changing slowly at first, but then much more rapidly as time moved on. I mean, when I got my first wah-wah pedal, that was like a big deal. That was probably the only thing, that and the distortion pedal, fuzz face or something. Those were the only 2 things you could really get for a guitar for a long time. In terms of Rush, we brought in bass pedals and Moog synth when it was available, just to expand our sound and our writing style. And that kind of developed. And with gear, as things started changing, we went to digital with delays and phase and flangers and all of that stuff. Boy, I couldn't get enough of that. I just wanted to try to make as many sounds as I could. And that's always been the way I personally think about how I develop my guitar playing and style, and keeping myself interested mostly by coming across all these other accessories that I could influence my sound with. And that kind of never really ended. And now, when you look at it, boy, so many plugins, so many guitar plugins, amp plugins, so many different sounds. It's almost too much, but it's a really interesting journey to find the things that do work and how you can apply them to whatever you're doing. My biggest beef with that whole thing now is that it's still not the same as putting a 57 in front of a Celestion. There's you hear it immediately. You hear the depth and the size of that sound from that amp, from that speaker. And although the plugins are are great, and they're getting better and better and better. To me, it always sounds like you've taped them onto a glass panel. They just seem small and just in that spot, not all encompassing in the sound. So I generally like to start off using plugins when I'm writing in a demo sort of stage, just to get ideas down quickly, and then I'll go back and I'll re-record everything with an amp and a good mic.
When you were just mentioning about all these different ways that you use the modern technology, and how you always try to embrace the new stuff that's out there. Looking back, is there a time when maybe you listened to like an old live recording or a record that you did where you're like, I nailed it there? I mean, all of us listening to your music, we think you nailed it on every record or every tour. But I mean, is there a place for you personally where you're like, boy, that sound, that was it, that guitar, that amp, or, how we recorded it?
Sort of. I think I've been pretty good at moving on. So when we make a record, when we recorded records, we spent a lot of time in pre-production, writing, and getting an idea of exactly what we want to do, and then go into the studio, and not only see that idea through, but also the spontaneous stuff that happens in the studio. And there are lots of records where I feel like, and they really nailed a great guitar sound there, and that solo sound really worked well for that song. But I always seem to go somewhere else. Like, what can I do? How can I make it better? Or how can I make it different? And I've done that a lot, sometimes to my detriment. I think when I got to probably the early 2000s, I had kind of a renaissance, and I went back to some nice Marshalls or the Hughes Kettners with lots of speakers, and back to those Gibsons with that thick, heavy sound. Mesa Boogie, the Mesa Boogie I had was great for clean sounds, and was a little easier to develop that switching, so you could not just use two channels, you could use two amps efficiently in a live application. So I'm always kind of moving away, and sometimes I find a better thing, and sometimes I find a worse thing. but it's the journey, I think, that really counts, and you learn so much from it. Not only the things you shouldn't do, but the things that you should do, and where you could go with it. So,
I love that story about you and the Mesa Boogie Mark V. I think that's the one you used for your cleans, like on Clockwork Angels. Yeah. And I when some friends and I, we were watching an interview with you, and you said that, and we looked at each other, and we were just like, man, how great would that be just to say, I have a Mesa Boogie Mark V, only for the cleans.
Or two of them.
Yeah.
You always need a backup.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. But honestly, that amp just was perfect for what I heard, for that clean sound. Because it has the size, it has the clarity, that nice sparkle on the top, but it's got the body in it right away. It's a great amp anyways for lots of different applications, but for me particularly, was perfect.
If you haven't checked it out yet, check out the Mark V 25. It's basically the Mark V, but they put it into like a 25 watt. And the thing is hilarious because you look underneath, and they pack so much stuff in there. They've actually got a little real spring reverb in there, but it's kind of hanging out just a little bit because they had to fit it. But I'm telling you, it's got two of the modes for the clean from the Mark V, and it's amazing how incredible that amp sounds at 25 watts.
Oh, I'll have to check it out.
Alex, I wanted to ask, over the years, all of these different instruments that you've been able to own, all of these different amps, all of this different gear, how does that make its way into what ultimately the Axcess became? How did, maybe there was one guitar that had hotter pickups that fit right in, or there was this need for this acoustic and electric type thing going on? How did the guitars in your life sort of find their way into the Axcess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Being a Gibson user early on, that satisfied my heavy sound, but the clean clarity was sometimes lacking. And so I would go to another guitar brand, and maybe a Fender or the signatures that I used in the 80s. That were single coil active pickups. Then they were very wiry and bright, but at that time, that's kind of what I was looking for. But I couldn't get another sound on that guitar. I couldn't get a dirtier sound. So it was always a compromise with that. And as years went on, we used a lot of acoustic guitar in a lot of Rush material. And I had an acoustic on a stand. It was maybe great in terms of a live performance to watch a guy play this thing and then jump to another instrument. But I wanted the convenience of being able to do it on one single platform. And as we went along, and Gibson wanted to do a signature model, I thought, well, yeah, I could do just something that's got my name on it, or we can develop an instrument that I would want to have and really utilize. Once we came out with the idea of all the stuff on it, it was like, yeah, this is perfect. This is it. 2 input jacks, the Floyd Rose, the nice sculpted neck so I can get up high. The coil splitter was like everything that I could possibly need is right there on that package. And one of the really satisfying things for me was after that release of that guitar, I'd heard that a bunch of Nashville session players bought that guitar for that reason, because it had that great utility and variety that they could go into any session and play anything, on that one instrument.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
I guess when somebody first experiences this guitar, like, what are you hoping they experience out of it?
With this Epiphone, I hope that when they take it out of the case and put it on their lap and start playing it, they think to themselves, wow, this thing feels great. This is awesome, and it sounds really good. And it does. When I got the first prototype, I spent time with it. I wanted to make sure that it had everything right about it. Every guitar requires a little bit of setup when you get it for your playing style. But I got to say, this guitar right out of the case felt great to me. Made just a couple of, action changes for my comfort level. But other than that, when I plugged it in and it sounded thick and heavy and all the stuff worked great, I was really, really thrilled with it.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm hoping, that anybody that gets by it thinks, boy, this was such a great deal. I love this instrument. It's perfect.
Yeah, we were talking about that infamous shopping spree, and it was sort of like, if you could get in a time machine and go back and maybe buy something with the knowledge that you have now, would you have bought anything different on that day?
I would have checked their old inventory to see if they had a 1960 Les Paul. I don't know. You know what? I don't think so, because, I ended up getting the things that I had always dreamed about. A couple Marshall Stacks, a couple Les Pauls. I already had the 335. So I felt like this is more stuff than I'll ever need in my whole life. But that never really does happen, does it?
Well, in that idea that you're always on this chase, or you're always looking for something new and interesting, specifically with how effects are applied to a guitar sound, how has your philosophy of using effects changed over the years?
I love using effects. I always have. I've always looked for whatever is coming up. And if I had a criticism about myself and my sound and my attitude, it was my use of chorus in the late 70s. When I first heard a jazz chorus in a JC-120, and we used it on a Farewell to Kings quite a bit, oh my God, I used to go into the studio and just sit in front of that amp because it had that stereo movement, and it was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing sound I've ever heard in my life. And shortly thereafter, I got the pedal, the stomp pedal, that big Roland stomp pedal, and it became such an integral part of my sound. And I think I kind of overused it, because when I went back to recording more straightforward, unaffected stuff, I realized, okay, there's a quality in that direct punchiness and almost compression of that sound, whereas the chorus kind of, squishes it up and moves it around, and it's really nice to listen to, but it's not for everything. And I think looking back, I probably overused it a little bit, but then at the same time, it became an integral part of the character of my sound. So I guess I'm not that bad.
Have you ever thought about, you have such a history with effects. Have you ever been approached, or have you ever thought about working on like a signature pedal or effects or anything like that?
Yeah, we're doing that right now. I've been, working with Mojo Tones for quite a few years. Really have a great relationship with them. They're fabulous people to work with. And very innovative and cutting edge and smart. And so we're looking at a whole series of pedals and effects down the line. Hopefully, sometime later this year, I think we'll have that all happening. So
awesome. So you mentioned going into the guitar shop when you were a kid and playing a guitar for an hour and being asked to leave and everything. I guaranteed somewhere out there today there's a kid in one of the Guitar Center stores, one of our stores, and they're sitting down trying out a guitar. Could be your Epiphone Axcess, and they're playing Spirit of Radio. They're trying to play that opening riff. And what would be your advice for someone who's been playing for a couple of years, or just how they should get better, and what could you tell them?
I think the most important thing is to play as much as you can. When I started playing guitar when I was 12, and despite having those I'll call them challenging instruments, I couldn't stop playing. Like would come home from school and I would just play until dinner, and then have dinner, and then play all night. And I always did that. Once we started playing on a more regular basis, for the first 3 or 4 years of Rush, from 68 to about 1971, the only gigs were high school gigs on a Friday night, maybe once or twice a month, if you were lucky. And in 1971, they lowered the drinking age in Ontario to 18 from 21, and that was the year we turned 18. And we went from playing this, 1 or 2 gigs a month to playing 6 nights a week with matinees on Saturdays for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And that required playing a lot. And even then, when we were playing every night, I still played all day at home, just feeling like I had to get warmed up. I used to boil my strings because I couldn't afford strings. So I'd boil them, clean them up, and put them back on every, week. I would do that. And I just couldn't stop playing. And I think that's probably the key thing. You can be a casual player and you can still have fun and it's enjoyable and all of that. But if you really want to be a player, you have to have a passion and a desire to get better and to be smart about what you're doing and how you're approaching it, and dedicating time to practice. And practice doesn't have to be boring playing scales or anything like that. Practice for me was just playing guitar for 2 or 3 hours. And I still do that. Often I'll sit on my balcony and at night, this is my favorite time, at night, and get in the mood and sit and play for a couple of hours to the stars. And it's such a spiritual experience for me. And I don't know, is that me or is that anybody who has that desire and that love to do that?
That's the gift, I think, of being able to play guitar, is that it's something you can do for your whole life. Absolutely.
Yeah, I often said that, when I'm an old man crapping my pants, which is not too far into the future, by the way. That's one thing I think that I'll still be able to do.
Alex, could you try and articulate? There's this meditative sense to playing guitar and playing music. There's this sort of spiritual connection. There's this sort of, ideas get zapped into you. Like, can you just sort of try to describe what it's like for you, that spiritual and meditative sense?
I think most importantly for me is to get out of the way. And that's why I say it's better to just play guitar rather than play scales and make it a job. I think one of the really cool things for someone who's getting into guitar and wants to take maybe a bit of a shortcut is to fool around with some alt tunings. So the guitar already resonates in a very harmonic way, and close your eyes when you're playing and just let your hand move around wherever it does, and you figure it out and you fall in. And because your eyes are closed, I think you're not aware of your surroundings, and you can just stand back and be an observer to what is happening. And truly, and I'm not just saying this, but truly that's the way I feel. I feel I play the best when I get out of the way, and I've developed that after 50 years of playing, of getting out of the way of my playing. I often not even aware of what I'm playing. And certainly with Rush, after our 30,000 hours of dedication, I could do that. I could read a paper. Or Getty used to watch baseball games sometimes during the playoffs when we're doing a gig, or at least get updates on a little monitor that he had, because, you sort of develop that skill and you're out of the way, and it's just you trust, everything else to happen as it should.
Well, when you first started, I in your documentary that came out around 2010, there's which, by the way, was brilliant. That was a very well made documentary. In fact, there's a few people at work in our office that became huge Rush fans just from that documentary.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
And when they showed some of the footage of you and Getty playing it when you were just kids, there was already a monstrous sound there. Just you and him just had just this wall of sound. And was there a time when you first, because I know you were friends, if I'm not mistaken, before you even played together. Is there a time when that kind of clicked, when you were playing together and you realized, oh man, there's a beautiful noise we're making together here?
Ged and I met in grade 8, and we were already sort of playing. We had just started playing around that time. I had my Kenora, he had a Kenora bass, and more importantly, he had an amp. So we would both plug into his amp and just jam after school. And most of the time, I would go to his place after school, and we'd play, for a couple of hours together. And every once in a while, he'd come to my place, and I'd borrow an amp from my neighbor, and we would do the same thing there. But I think because we were so young and so impressionable, and this was such a big deal to us, music and bands like Cream and Hendrix and The Who, they were the big bands, and that's, kind of those were the bands we were trying to emulate and the players we were trying to emulate at the time. In fact, we painted our Kenoras much like Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton did. But if you could imagine the artist that painted their guitars, if he was very drunk and had a broken arm and missing two fingers on his painting hand, that's kind of what our guitars looked like. They were day-glow red and orange and all kinds of stupid things on them. But, we wanted to be cool like that. And we just loved playing together and learning these songs and all of that. So it seemed only natural that eventually we would play in a band together. And a lot of it has to do with that connection of those two 13-year-old kids that grew up together. I mean, he's my closest friend, always has been. He's more than a brother to me. So to have those kind of qualities in a relationship sets you up, I think, for a long voyage together.
It's a wonderful story, I mean, just not just between the three of you, but knowing that there was road crew on your that stayed decades with the band, and And it was, I mean, it's such an amazing, I mean, your manager who stayed with you the whole time, you know, from when before, I think maybe even he knew when he was just trying to be a manager.
Even before that.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, just that story. I mean, it's amazing because there's so much, you know, there's so many pressures that happen, and people get egos and things like that, man. I mean, you know, you guys kept it together, and I think it shows in your music. I really do. I mean, I've been a huge fan since, you know, for over 30 years now, like probably 35 years, since I was in like 8th grade. And, you know, it's always been real, everything you guys have done. And I just want to say thank you for that, because you've taken us on a journey, and it's a journey that's been so worthwhile.
Thank you very much. And we feel the same way. You know, fortunately for us, we had a similar sense of humor. So we laughed 90% of the time we were together. But we always took our music very, very seriously, and we always wanted to be the best we could and one step beyond that. And I got to say, even at the end, for Neil, his issue was that he was reaching an age where it wasn't physically possible to play the way he wanted to play. And we always set that very high standard for ourselves. And that remained through the whole 40 years that we toured together and wrote music and recorded records.
I was fortunate enough to be at your very last show at the Forum.
Yeah.
And when you guys closed that first set, you did Losing It. And my buddy, one of my best friends who came down, who's a huge Rush fan as well, we went down to get a beer afterwards. And there was a line of just a bunch of guys just lined up getting beer. And all of us were like, man, I had tears in my eye when they finished that.
Yeah.
And all these grown men were just crying after that set. I mean, and you know what, that show, that I don't think you could have had a better show than, you know, to close that tour out on. It was a great event to be there.
Yeah, it was. It really, really was.
And that's a testament to the power of the music holding everyone together. It's that same spiritual thread.
Yeah.
Alex, so it's about time that we wrap this thing up here. Perry, did you have one last question that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, aside from your brilliant guitar playing, Alex, and all the great songs and the memories that I have and everyone else, there's something else I want to thank you for. And that's, you know, watching you play Gibson guitars, like your 57 reissue, your 58 reissue, and you kept the pickguard on. And I want to thank you for that, because there's always that argument with Gibson guys, pickguard on, pickguard off. And the guys that take their pickguards off think they're somehow cooler than those of us that leave it on. And mine in the background back here, they're on. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, there was a period that I took mine off because just the way I played at the time, I parked my 3 fingers on the bottom of the pickup cover, or the trim cover around it. So with the pickguard on it, it's got a little difficult to get in there. And I took my pickguard off the 335, you know, way back in the old days for that reason. But cosmetically, you got to have the pickguard on, and that's it. That's the real guitar.
It's like showing up at a party with no pants on. You got.
Well, I have done that too. Come to think of it.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. We got the definitive answer on the pickguard debate, so that was very helpful for us. And congratulations on the new Axcess, and thank you again.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.